Even though Danganronpa is themed around despair, hope always overcomes it. And we see that hope overcome it. We wouldn't see or have the overcoming if it weren't for the most prominent characters in the series, the protagonists. Today, I'm analysing and then ranking all of them, and I'll be mixing up who I'm ranking. Spoilers from this point on for all of the games. Of course, I'm ranking Makoto, Hajime, Komaru, Kaede, and Shuichi, but I'm gonna include Keebo and Toko, as Keebo was the protagonist of the TV show, and Toko was literally the deurotagonist of Ultra Despair Girls. If you're annoyed, just be glad I didn't include Rantaro or Nagito, as I could argue for their protagonist-like roles as well. Anyway, without further ado, wait. I'm also, of course, analysing what makes a protagonist, and in fact, this whole ranking and video is solely to prove why I think these characters work as protagonists, alongside what makes them work in their roles individually. Alright, like and subscribe, and now for real this time, without further ado, here we go.
Danganronpa.
If you've seen my antagonist ranking, you'll be familiar with the ranking system, I hope. Only the difference is that instead of 8 antagonists, I'm ranking 7 protagonists. This time around, I'll be only ranking them in one category, as being a protagonist involves being well written as a character as well. Alright, I'll be, as I did last time, introducing and running down on the 7 contestants, how they fit into the list, and what makes them a protagonist. To be a protagonist, there's a few contesting things. I would say you need to be on the further side of class trial rooms, but that only applies to the true protagonists, that being Makoto, Hajime, and Shuichi. Therefore, for the sake of Kaede, Komaru, Toko, and Keebo, I'll be ignoring this rule since it isn't entirely true. A common thing between protagonists I've noticed is a heroic sentiment, sort of like the Joestars from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Even Toko has this, it's just riddled with insecurity throughout Trigger Happy Havoc and appears in the second half of Ultra Despair Girls. Could you consider Genocide Jack as the 8th contestant of this video? Who knows? Anyway, all the included characters contain this heroic spirit. Keebo in Case 6, Shuichi and Kaede throughout their screen times, Komaru through the latter parts of Ultra Despair Girls, and the original two developing this over time in their games as well. They also need to foil the antagonist in at least a few fields. All of these protagonists foil the antagonist, even including Toko and Keebo. Whether it's Toko's rise as a hero versus Haiji's fall as a villain, or Keebo's naivety and sensitive nature totally foiling Kokichi's cold suspicious one. The big thing is also the fact you need to be able to play from their perspective. I mean, you see this done with all included characters in today's video. Makoto, Hajime, Komaru, and Shuichi throughout their whole games, while Toko can be used as an alternative boost character, Kaede is the early game protagonist, and Keebo is the protagonist for around 30 to 40 minutes of the 6th class trial. Out of all extra POVs in that finale trial, Keebo takes up the most of it. This is the essence of a protagonist in any form of media after all. Of course, the Danganronpa quirk for all included protagonists is the Ahoge, which tempted me to include Nagito as he follows literally all of my previous points. But alas, I'm being generous. He obviously isn't a protagonist. Rantaro has 2, but anyway. Makoto and Hajime both have Ahoges, and then with the others they become really obvious as they stick out from typically flat hair, besides Toko who has some wild red hair. But you get my point, I hope. Also, new true protagonists have alliterative names. Finally, for my points, every protagonist has some sort of development or switch up in character. Typically, these developments stem from established insecurity in the early game. Komaru, Toko, Hajime, Shuichi, and Makoto all have this to an obvious extent, though Keebo and Kaede are a little more complicated. I consider Keebo overcoming his inner voice and going off on his own in Chapter 6 as some form of development, as his inner voice is a big restriction on him, it seems. Confirmed in the class trial following. Kaede to me is the most difficult to look into. You could consider her being a little subversive, as instead of overcoming her insecurity, she falls to it. Her fear of the killing game is her downfall, which, as sad as it is very interesting. It is a development related to her insecurity, rather than overcoming. Close enough to the point where it counts for me. I think that's it for my points, and I even indirectly linked all or most of the characters to these points. They've always got some form of linking to the themes and a significant lack of backstory besides how they got into their situations, but you know, characters like Hajime go against this, so I wouldn't consider it explicitly a rule. Anyway, let's move on. I'll be covering these protagonists in chronological order, detailing how they fit into the rules and categories stated, then finally ending off with a ranking and listings. Then we good. Anyway, let's start off with the ultimate hope, lucky student, and simp Makoto Naegi.
Danganronpa.
Makoto Naegi is the OG of Danganronpa, the OG of protagonists, and the OG of being memorable, I guess. This guy has the first Ahoge, alongside fitting with themes of hope and despair, as he quite literally is the definition of hope. In an environment of suspicion and distrust, his naive nature is what helps him create hope and optimism. He doesn't just foil the antagonists, but the game itself as well. It is the darkest game in the franchise, to be fair. So, we've checked both his relation to themes, his ahoge, and foiling of antagonists, as Byakuya is fully cold and selfish, while Junko is all about despair. Trigger Happy Havoc is the most binary of the bunch in the end. His development is basically being insecure about being normal, and then realizing he isn't exactly normal, as his personality is effectively his talent. His ultimate hope stems from his optimistic attitude, and he's arguably one of the most important figures in the universe of Danganronpa. Of course, you play the game from his perspective, which makes him an antagonist, and his heroic spirit shines through when he assists in figuring out cases, when he states he will carry the burdens of everybody's deaths in Class Trial 1, and finally, when he directly motivates everybody in the closing act of the game. That's all for checking boxes, it seems. I'd personally put him up at like 5th, considering he has the least development out of any protagonist to me. Well, excluding Keebo. He's also the most binary, as I said, and while I'm sure some people enjoy more simple stuff like that, I prefer the others to an extent. Though he isn't at the bottom for a reason. Let's go to the ultimate orange juice lover.
Danganronpa.
Hajime Hinata is similar to Makoto in the realm of development, stemming from an insecurity of having no talent. In fact, it motivates him to an extent. However, unlike Makoto, who realizes his gifted talent has potential, Hajime goes from thinking he has a useful talent to realizing he doesn't have one in the first place, kind of like starting his arc late. He goes backwards but for similar reasoning to Makoto, then realizing he has more potential for choosing his future because of his lack of talent. This directly checks the second box, being theming, as his character arc links up straight to the theme of future shown later on in the game, and even causes it to be consistent throughout the whole game. He is directly part of the theme and has an ahoge alongside being the point of view for the game 95% of the time, besides half of the Chapter 4 investigation. He is also a lot less optimistic than Makoto, calling himself a pessimist occasionally throughout the game. It's obvious he's made to subvert Makoto most of the time, which makes sense as the whole game does, and these were the only two main Danganronpa games at the time. He also foils the insane Nagito with his normalcy very visibly throughout the class trials, but his protagonist-esque heroic attitude allows him to understand Nagito to a specific extent. Now, conclusively, Hajime has, at least to the avatar shown in Danganronpa 2, no prior backstory. We know the events leading up to it, but the Hajime in that Neo World program has no info prior to his pre-high school self. Technically, he has a backstory, but he doesn't simultaneously. Anyway, he's very protagonist-like and well-written, albeit a little basic. His Izuru Kamakura stuff, heavy relation to his killing game, and more make him a central part of everything to me. I'll give him second place as he takes the leader role, has flaws and positives, and has a heavy association with the overarching story. I also find him more relatable without being annoying than Makoto. W character. Also orange juice.
Danganronpa.
Komaru Naegi, Makoto Naegi's sister. This girl definitely checks the boxes of protagonist vibes and has a second protagonist to help her, Toko Fukawa, though I'll get to her in the next chapter. She's probably the most insecure of every protagonist, possibly excluding Shuichi and definitely Toko, as she's thrown in the middle of what is pretty much an apocalypse of Monokumas killing everybody. Initially, she has the opportunity to save people but rejects the notion out of fear for her inability to help, even though it's just in her head. She eventually overcomes this, but not before she has one final breakdown in the last act of the story that gives Toko space to shine as well. Komaru shows her heroic spirit slowly throughout the game, and she chooses to stay in Toa City for the sake of her friends and for the overall residents of the area, and finds a middle point between saving children and adults or killing them. In terms of story, Komaru is the main point of view for the player majority of the time, excluding some dramatically ironic exposition scenes with the villains at points. In terms of gameplay, it swaps between Komaru and Toko. She has a classic Ahoge despite her mostly flat hair like the other future protagonists of the series, as she of course fits the themes of the game as she discovers herself as more than just Makoto's sister, while Monika doesn't have the equivalent development. Finally, she has like zero backstory. The known parts of her backstory are things like her family, why she was locked up in her apartment in the beginning of the game, as well as that's it for the most part. Finally, this is what saves her for me: her relationship with the antagonists Haiji and Monika. She foils both of their corrupt natures against her innocent run, but the fact she tried to replicate Makoto's heroism and Monika tried to replicate Junko's evil is an amazing parallel between the both that is pointed at by her in the ending sets of dialogue in the final conflict. Despite that, I'm putting her in 6th place. As relatively, even though she is good, other characters are better at points.
Danganronpa.
In this section, there are some disturbing sequences mentioned throughout. If things like starvation or abuse bother or trigger you, please skip to the next chapter. You'll still see the ranking of Toko, you just won't get the analysis part of it. So, you know, it's alright. Toko Fukawa is a fully normal student in Trigger Happy Havoc, a reference in Goodbye Despair, and a protagonist in Ultra Despair Girls. Weird how that happens, but there you go. To some, it's hard to agree with this, but once I look through the criteria I've decided on, I'm sure you'll definitely agree to some level, if you feel the same about the criteria itself. Firstly, Toko definitely overcomes her insecurity to some level, as she is almost unbearable in the first game and the beginning of Ultra Despair Girls. However, through Ultra Despair Girls, she grows to be far more bearable and admirable too. She has one last moment of being bad when she betrays Komaru, but Toko easily makes up for it after that throughout the story afterwards. That confirms her insecurity and development. But what about her point of view? This doesn't exactly happen in story segments or cutscenes until the finale where Komaru is completely out of it, but we all know playing as her in gameplay sections easily boosts your W's within seconds. Toko was definitely a protagonist, and the next point is my proof. Her hair changes in this game when compared to Trigger Happy Havoc, and she develops in a Hogak. Boom. The artist Rui Katsumazaki is effectively confirming her role as a main character, is he not? Of course, if she always had it, I'd ignore it, but it's intentionally added later on in the game where she feels more like a protagonist. It matches up, it's not a coincidence, I'm telling you. In terms of backstory, there are some details because of her free time events in the first entry in the franchise. She was abused by her unique parents, being locked in a closet for 3 days with no food. This caused her to develop a pathological fear of the dark, and does help explain her insecurities to an extent. Overall, this causes her to be one of the only characters on the list with backstory, being quite specific to an extent. Finally, she foils Haji as both her and him have insecurity and fear of the opposing unknown, but Toko refuses to let that define her, change an overall consumer, while Haji does the opposite. This allows her to fit with the themes of self-discovery as well, and I rank her right above her bestie Komaru in 5th place, as she definitely has some more depth.
Danganronpa.
Kaede Akamatsu is the ultimate pianist, and typically considered the most different of the protagonists. Objectively, she is different, but relatively not the most. Shuichi is, to me. They're both distinct protagonists in my opinion, but Kaede doesn't exactly have growth from her insecurities, but instead goes from initially confident to destroyed by her own fears. She's somewhat like a narrative device used to introduce players and characters alike to the atmosphere set throughout V3. It makes sense when considering how different Chapter 1 feels to Chapters 2 to the epilogue. Conveniently, for this video, not for her, her death is caused by her heroic nature and desire to end the killing game. She kills Rantaro Umami in hopes of ending the killing game through ways of killing the mastermind, and that's 2 points checked. And now, the fact that Chapter 1 and the prologue are both from her point of view, and that the sections of the game are made to literally paint her as the true protagonist. She once again has an Ahoge, with her only bits of backstory being her obsession with piano. She also foils Samugi and Kokichi once again because of their suspicious, malicious nature in contrast to her positive, motivating attitude. She subverts the themes of her game rather than playing into them, and in fact, in her free time events in Salmon Team, she's running the events more than Shuichi, in true protagonist fashion. I actually like Kaede quite a lot, and think she does Makoto's job a lot better. I ranked her just above him in third place, under Hajime right now, but above a lot of the others. I can feel the controversy this ranking is going to create.
Danganronpa.
Shuichi Saihara is my favourite protagonist. Being the ultimate detective, he incorporates himself perfectly into the killing game environment being a detective, as he has investigated murders even prior to the main story. Out of the main game protagonists, this guy is definitely the most insecure, quiet, and overall has a very distinct personality. Unlike the loud, cliche protagonist characters in the other games, and even the beginning of V3, Shuichi is almost completely silent in Chapter 1, and slowly grows more comfortable, overcoming his insecurity and filling the shoes of a protagonist. He's quite heroic as he overcomes his insecurity, prioritizing the emotional stability of his peers and using his previous talents he was afraid of being bad at as his main strength. It is poetic, and in fact, in a game of truth and lies, he was lying to himself in the beginning. He has an ahoge, and half of the first class trial and onwards is from Shuichi's perspective. Even the extra stuff, such as the salmon team, happens from his point of view. Shuichi has some backstory in the realm of his uncle's detective business, alongside his parents leaving, and even the moment with his first case being figured out. This is the only exception from the backstory rule, including Keebo and including Toko, though all of this is figured out while he's a support. And I think that them giving him a backstory was meant to subvert the expectation of him becoming a protagonist, which added to the shock factor. Because even though the protagonist dying is already crazy enough, it's good to be safe. That's why they took so long to write Chapter 1. If you didn't know, the writers of Danganronpa took the longest to write the first chapter compared to any other chapter. Finally, he foils the antagonist to an extent, though Shuichi develops from the antagonist foiling the support more than anything. These breakoffs from the typical rules are why I consider V3 to be the most unique of the main entries in the franchise. I rank Shuichi at the top as he clearly has the most depth and is the biggest exception from the rules, which I enjoy more than anything.
Danganronpa.
You might have expected this video to go to the outro and end, but there's one more character, Keebo or K1B0. You might be a little confused why I'm including this guy, so let me shed some light on my justifications. Keebo was canonically a protagonist, leading the TV show counterpart of the 53rd season. Keebo is also the point of view for 30 minutes or so in the last class trial. He's got the ahoge, and unlike a lot of coincidence ahoge characters, Keebo uses his as a plot device. The absence of it is relevant to the story of Chapter 6, so it's got meaning. Enough meaning to justify that a Hoge relating to his role. Keebo doesn't particularly have an insecurity, but I think his inner voice and how it goes away resembles it and its developments in other protagonists enough. He fully switches up for a period of time, and I could easily call that some form of development. Keebo has some form of backstory, accidentally killing his professor that created him. There's a pattern of the V3 protagonists having far more depth than the other ones, excluding Toko, since I doubt she was planning to have that role prior to Ultra Despair Girls, and I find that really cool. Keebo also shows heroism in Case 6 when he takes initiative due to Shuichi's breakdown. On top of that, he has an obvious contrast to both antagonists as he's constantly at odds with Kokichi, and is the opposite voting option to Samugi in the final class trial of V3. This all creates some form of protagonist vibes coming straight from K1B0. I rate him, you know what? I was gonna rate him at the bottom, but I'm changing my mind after writing this. I'll put him in Toko's current place, and move her and Komaru down by one place. Komaru is now in last place, and Toko is second last. Keebo is third last, of course.
Danganronpa.
Rantaro, I'm joking. Unfortunately, we never have his point of view, so he technically isn't eligible for this list. This video is finished, and fun fact, I wrote all of this while editing my Rantaro analysis, so I guess I fulfilled my hunger of talking about him. While writing this, that video isn't even a day old, but we are getting closer to the end of my primary Danganronpa content phase, unless I get a rush of creativity, which I would like. I love this fandom in the games and want to continue building a fan base of people who feel the same way. However, I think the next video will be ranking Eden's Garden characters, or maybe even soundtracks, I don't know. There's a lot to do, and maybe I'll start doing more music-based Danganronpa videos. Alright, leaving it to recording me. So, first off, it says, be yourself broski, and I think it's brown. It's really weird. And then there's a message from my friend from school who said, you were fat, thing, this should die in a hole. So, there you go. Anyway, the Rantaro video died so hard, got so good, and it just died. I don't really mind it though. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I got a lot of good support, and I really appreciate every comment on there. With Rantaro, I wish I could talk about it more actually. I saw an edit today of a song where it's like, where the girls at, and it was about him, and it was really good. It was like 3 years ago. It was made 3 years ago. I saw it today, but it was so good. I'm kind of on the tangent right now. Hopefully this video gets edited quickly. I kind of just want to get this one out. And I don't know if I will make an Eden's Garden ranking video, because I don't know if I'm really enjoying writing it. I don't know, with Eden's Garden, since it's only a prologue, it's kind of hard to find content in there when you're making analysis videos. Like, I want to make more, I really do, but I don't know if I can. You know, if I can't make an Eden's Garden ranking video, I'm probably going to move to a music-based video, and hopefully that's fun. Who really knows? Anyway, that's pretty much it. Not gonna lie, there's not much to say. Final ranking will probably be on screen this whole time. I don't really know. Depends on how it feels. And yeah, thank you guys for watching, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Said that at the beginning of the video, but it's not like you're gonna subscribe when you haven't actually seen the video yet, right? Anyway, have a good day, guys. I'll be working on the next video from here, I guess. It's just gonna be a loop. It's gonna be a repetitive life every single day, spent on YouTube on that grind set mindset. Oh, it's so sad.